Will tough discipline from a giant cowboy turn a bratty stablehand into a changed man? The first thing Jasper Holt heard that morning wasn't the roosters. It was a car door slamming so hard that the horses in the near paddock flinched, tossed their heads, and shuffled nervously against the fence. Then came silence. Then the unmistakable sound of expensive sneakers crunching over gravel, slow, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had already decided he didn't want to be here before he'd even looked at the place properly. Jasper set his coffee mug on the fence rail and turned around. The boy standing at the edge of the yard looked like trouble wearing a designer jacket. He was maybe 22, 23 at the oldest, with dark hair falling carelessly across his forehead and a jaw that hadn't quite decided whether it wanted to be sharp or soft. He was lean but not slight. There was a wiry, coiled tension in his shoulders, like something that hadn't been given permission to move yet. His hands were jammed deep into his pockets. He was scanning the ranch with an expression that managed to be simultaneously bored and hostile, as though he'd already calculated every single way this place was beneath him and had filed the results under waste of time. Behind him, a dusty sedan sat idling in the drive. Through the windshield, Jasper could make out the silhouette of an older man, tired-looking, gripping the steering wheel. Then the window rolled down. "Eli," the man's voice carried just far enough across the yard, "don't make this harder than it has to be." The boy, Eli, didn't even turn around. "Already is," he said flatly. The sedan sat there for another few seconds, engine ticking. Then it reversed slowly, turned, and rolled away down the gravel road. The dust hung in the morning air long after the sound of the engine had faded to nothing. When everything settled, there was just the wind moving through the cottonwood trees, the distant murmur of horses, the smell of fresh grass and old wood and manure baked warm by an early sun, and two men standing on opposite sides of a yard, watching each other. Jasper picked up his coffee mug, took a long, slow sip, then he walked over. He was not a small man. At 26, Jasper stood 6'4" in his worn boots, and every inch of that height had been built through years of ranch work that started when other kids were still figuring out multiplication tables. His shoulders were broad. His hands wrapped around the mug were rough and calloused and deeply tanned. He wore a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and a battered straw hat pushed back on his head. His eyes were a quiet, steady gray-green, the kind of eyes that didn't show much on the surface but saw everything. He stopped about 3 feet from the new arrival and looked down at him. Eli looked up, and for one unguarded half-second, something flickered across his face that wasn't boredom and wasn't hostility, something that looked a lot closer to surprise. Then it was gone, snapped shut behind that practiced scowl. "You Eli Morrow?" Jasper asked. "Depends who's asking." "Man who decides whether you sleep in the bunkhouse or the barn," Jasper said pleasantly and took another sip of coffee. Eli's jaw tightened. He held eye contact for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable, which told Jasper two things immediately. He wasn't a coward, and he had the kind of pride that was going to cause both of them nothing but problems. "Yeah," Eli said finally, "I'm Eli Morrow. Jasper Holt, I run this property for Mr. Delaney." He extended his free hand. Eli looked at it, looked at Jasper's face. Then slowly, like it was costing him something, he pulled his right hand from his pocket and shook it. His grip was firm, deliberately so, the kind of grip a young man uses when he's trying to prove something. Jasper matched it without effort, without drama, and let go first. "Come on," he said, turning back toward the barn. "I'll show you where you're staying and what you're doing. You eat breakfast." "Not hungry." "That'll change by 9, he kept walking. After a beat, he heard Eli's footsteps follow. Eli Morrow had not come to Delaney Ranch voluntarily. That much was made clear in the email Jasper had received from Richard Morrow, Eli's father, a property developer in Austin, 2 weeks earlier. It was 3 paragraphs long, carefully worded, and said essentially the following. "My son has spent the better part of 2 years making catastrophically bad decisions, burning bridges and coasting on charm and borrowed money. And I am placing him in your care for 1 full season because I have run out of ideas and my therapist suggested structured responsibility in a removed environment. And honestly, at this point, I'd try anything." There was a figure mentioned at the end, a very generous figure for Jasper's trouble. Jasper had read the email twice, looked out the kitchen window at the empty east paddock that needed fencing, thought about the roof on the main barn that was one bad rainstorm away from disaster, and written back, "Fine, send him." He had been doing this for 2 years now, taking on difficult young men sent by families who didn't know what else to do with them. Not officially, not as some kind of program, Just quietly word of mouth because Mr. Delaney trusted him and he'd had some success before and he understood something that a lot of people didn't. Sometimes a person didn't need to be fixed, they just needed to be made useful. But standing now in the doorway of the equipment shed while Eli Morrow stood in the middle of the space looking at the array of tools and gear with barely concealed contempt, Jasper thought that this one might test that theory harder than most. "This is your domain for the next several months," Jasper said, gesturing around the shed. "Equipment maintenance, stall mucking, feeding rotations, fence repair, paddock prep, you'll rotate through everything. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, but everything matters." Eli was looking at a pitchfork like it had personally offended him. "You're serious?" "Generally, yes." "I thought," he stopped. "You thought what?" "I thought this was going to be more like," he made a vague gesture, "I don't know, a working holiday." Jasper looked at him steadily. "Where'd you get that idea?" Eli shrugged with one shoulder. "My dad said it was a ranch, people ride horses on ranches." "People who know how to ride horses on ranches," Jasper said. "Can you ride?" Eli's silence was answer enough. "Right," Jasper said, "so we start at 5:30. You get Sundays off, you eat what's made and clean up after yourself. You don't touch the horses without me present until I say otherwise." And he paused, letting the next part land clearly. "You don't walk off, people have tried that before. It's 11 miles to the nearest town, the road gets no cell signal for the first 4 miles, and I've had to go collect 2 different people from the side of that road at midnight in the rain. I'd prefer not to do it again." Eli was staring at him now with an expression that was hard to read, partly defiant, partly calculating, and beneath both of those things, almost invisibly, something that Jasper had learned to recognize. The quiet, careful face of someone who was trying very hard not to show how scared they actually were. "Do I have a choice?" Eli asked. "About being here? Not really, your dad's paying for the season." Jasper turned toward the door then glanced back. "About what kind of time you have here, that one's entirely up to you." The first week was, by any reasonable measure, a disaster. Not a dramatic disaster. Not the kind that involved shouting or broken things or anyone storming off down the road. Just the quiet, grinding, daily disaster of a young man who had never in his life been required to do anything difficult before breakfast, being required to do several difficult things before breakfast, badly and with barely suppressed fury. Eli was late every morning. Not by much, 5 minutes the first day, then 10, then back to 7, as though he was testing the exact outer limit of what he could get away with. He moved through his tasks with the energy of a man serving a sentence, technically completing each thing, but in the way a lawyer finds a loophole rather than a spirit. He did the minimum. He rushed the parts that required patience. He made small mistakes that added up: a latch not quite secured, a bucket put back in the wrong place, a gate left unlatched in the way you do when your mind isn't really on what your hands are doing. Jasper corrected him each time, quietly, without heat. And that, more than anything else, seemed to unsettle Eli. He had clearly been braced for anger, for lectures, for the kind of heavy-handed authority that looks for opportunities to remind you who's in charge. When it didn't come, when Jasper just said, simply and without ceremony, that latch needs to close all the way or come back and do the water buckets again, you rushed them. Eli would look at him with this slightly unnerved expression, like a man waiting for a blow that keeps not arriving. Jasper noticed, he filed it away. On the 6th morning, Eli showed up 11 minutes late and found Jasper standing in the middle of the yard with 2 mugs of coffee. He held one out. Eli stopped walking, looked at the mug, looked at Jasper's face. "Is this some kind of trick?" "It's coffee," Jasper said. "It'll get cold." Eli took it. They stood in silence for a moment, facing the east paddock where the morning light was just beginning to come in gold and long-shadowed through the cottonwoods. "You're not going to yell at me about being late," Eli said. It wasn't really a question. "Would it help if I did?" Eli thought about it with unexpected seriousness. "No," he admitted. "Then no." Another silence. Eli wrapped both hands around the mug in a way that was oddly young-looking, almost boyish, and looked out at the horses moving slowly through the morning mist in the paddock. "They're beautiful," he said, so quietly it might have been accidental. Jasper followed his gaze. 3 horses: Copper, a big warm-blood chestnut; Nora, a gray mare getting on in years; and Ghost, a pale quarter horse who was still young and nervous and not quite sure about the world yet. They moved through the low mist with the liquid ease of animals that had never doubted their own right to take up space. Yeah, Jasper agreed. Which one's the dangerous one? Jasper glanced at him sideways, ghost, but not because he wants to be. Eli nodded slowly, watching the pale horse. What happened to him? Bad handling when he was young. People who didn't understand that being scared and being difficult aren't the same thing. He didn't look at Eli when he said it, he didn't need to. A beat of silence, then Eli said, "I'm not scared of anything," in a tone that was just a shade too flat to be convincing. "I know," Jasper said mildly. "Drink your coffee, we've got fence posts to move before it gets hot." Things shifted incrementally in the second week. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just the way light changes in a room when clouds move, you don't always notice the moment it happens, only that something is different from how it was. Eli started showing up at 5:25, then 5:20. He still didn't volunteer conversation, but he stopped doing the minimum with the same grim deliberateness. There were moments, brief, quickly suppressed, when he actually seemed to focus. When he was working with the fence wire and had to measure twice before cutting, and something in his expression settled into concentration rather than resistance. He had good hands, Jasper noticed, quick and precise when he forgot to be sullen about it. He also noticed other things, though he was careful not to dwell on them. The way Eli's hair fell forward when he bent over his work. The small vertical frown line that appeared between his brows when he was trying to work something out. The way he laughed, which happened rarely accidentally, and always seemed to surprise him as much as anyone else, a short, genuine sound that he immediately tried to take back. Jasper noticed these things the way you notice weather patterns, observationally, quietly, without drawing any particular conclusion. On the ninth day, he let Eli approach Ghost for the first time. They stood at the paddock rail together in the late afternoon, the long shadows of cottonwoods stretching across the dry grass. Ghost stood about 20 feet away, watching them with the alert, sideways suspicion that was his default expression around people he didn't know. "Don't look directly at him," Jasper said quietly. "Prey animals don't like direct eye contact from someone they don't trust yet. It reads as predatory." "How do I let him know I'm not a threat?" Eli asked. His voice was different here, genuine curiosity without the defensive edge. Like the armor only worked when there were other people around to perform it for. "Be boring," Jasper said. "Stand still, let him come to you, don't reach, don't lean in, just be a thing that's in his space without demanding anything from him." Eli absorbed this. Then he leaned against the fence rail in a loose, easy way and looked off to one side and waited. Ghost watched him, his nostrils flared, his ears moved. It took 4 minutes. Jasper tracked it without looking at his watch before the horse took one step forward, then another, then stood still again, reassessing. Eli didn't move, didn't look, just existed patiently in the horse's space. Ghost came the rest of the way in 3 slow, careful steps, stretched his neck out and touched his nose to Eli's shoulder. Eli went completely still. His breath came out slowly. His eyes, when Jasper glanced at his face, were wide and something in them had gone open and unguarded in a way that was almost painful to see, because you could tell it was an expression he didn't usually let out. "Now you can raise your hand," Jasper said quietly, slowly, back of the hand first, not the palm. Eli raised his hand. Ghost sniffed it. Then the horse pressed his forehead gently against Eli's hand, and Eli made a sound in his throat that was barely audible, something soft and surprised and involuntary. "He chose you," Jasper said. Eli looked at him sideways, his eyes were slightly bright, which he was clearly fighting. "Why does that matter?" "Because Ghost doesn't choose people who aren't worth it." Eli turned back to the horse quickly, pressing his hand flat against the warm white neck, and didn't say anything else for a long time. But the line of his shoulders had changed. Something had unlocked. By the end of the 3rd week, they had developed something that could tentatively be called a rhythm. 5:15, Eli appeared in the yard, always first now, which was either competitiveness or something else. 5:30, feed rounds. 6:30, stalls. 9, fence work or paddock maintenance or whatever the day required. 12, lunch at the long table on the back porch. Afternoons, variable. Evenings, Jasper usually found Eli sitting on the top rail of Ghost's paddock, one knee up, watching the horse graze, looking like he was thinking about something he hadn't figured out the words for yet. They talked more, not about anything significant, at first: work, weather, horses, the specific and eccentric personalities of the ranch's various animals. But Jasper had learned long ago that the things people talked about casually were often just the surface layer over the things they actually needed to say. and that if you just kept the surface conversation going patiently enough, the underneath things had a way of finding their own way out. It happened on a Wednesday evening, 3.5 weeks in. They were sitting on the back porch after dinner, Jasper in the big wooden chair, Eli cross-legged on the porch steps watching the sun go down behind the ridge. The sky was doing something extraordinary, layers of orange and rose and a deep, dusty purple that climbed all the way to the first stars. The horses were quiet. The ranch was quiet. It was the kind of evening that made silence feel comfortable rather than awkward. "I burned down a business," Eli said, out of nowhere, into the silence. Jasper looked at him. "What?" "Not literally." Eli was picking at a splinter on the porch step with his thumbnail. "I was running the Austin location of my dad's company, Junior Management, learning the business." He said the last 3 words with a particular flatness that communicated volumes about how he felt about that plan. "I made some decisions, bad ones, cost the branch about $200,000 and 3 major contracts." He paused. "And I didn't tell anyone for 6 weeks. Jasper was quiet, letting him go on. "By the time it came out, the damage was—" Eli trailed off, shook his head. "My dad didn't yell at me, that was the worst part. He just looked at me like he didn't recognize me, like I'd become someone he hadn't expected." He looked out at the darkening sky. "He said I had too much potential to be this careless, like potential is a thing you carry around that you can drop." "Can't you?" Jasper asked. Eli glanced at him sharply, then looked away again. "I don't know, maybe I've been dropping things for a while." "What things?" A long pause. "I had a plan once for myself, not my dad's plan, mine, architecture. I wanted to design spaces the way buildings feel, not just look. I was good at it." The past tense landed quietly. "But it was going to take years of school and student loans and starting at zero, and my dad had this whole other idea, and it was just easier to," he made a gesture with one hand, "let it fall." "It's easier to fail at something you never really wanted," Jasper said quietly, "than to fail at something that actually matters to you." Eli looked at him. This time he didn't look away. "Yeah," he said very quietly. "Yeah, exactly that." The sun finished setting. The first stars appeared properly, and the sky went from purple to deep navy, and the fireflies started in the long grass at the edge of the yard. Neither of them spoke for a while, but it was a different kind of silence now, the kind that comes after something real has been said, and both people know it and neither wants to disturb it with anything lesser. "What about you?" Eli said finally. "You always want to be a rancher." Jasper considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things. "I wanted to be a veterinarian," he said, "specifically large animal medicine." "What happened?" "Money, timing. My dad got sick when I was 19 and I came back to help run the family property, and one thing led to another, and I was still here at 24 when Mr. Delaney offered me this position." He looked out at the dark paddock. "I don't regret it, this is good work," but he paused. "There are mornings I drive past the vet's office in town and feel something." "Something like what?" "Like looking through a window at a room you didn't go into." Eli was very still for a moment, then he said with a care that was new and noticeable, "You should still do it, the vet school thing, you're 26. Jasper looked at him. The porch light caught the angles of Eli's face in a way that made him look older than usual, or maybe just more honest than usual, which amounted to the same thing. "Maybe," Jasper said. "Not maybe, you should." Eli said it with a firmness that was oddly touching, like he'd found something to be certain about and was putting his weight on it. "You're smarter than you let on, and you're good with animals in a way that's—" He stopped, seemed to catch himself. "That's what?" Jasper asked. "That's different," Eli said carefully. "It's like they know you mean it." The words sat between them for a moment, warm and slightly precarious, the way honest things often are. Then Eli stood up and said, "I'm going to bed," in the flat, practical tone of a man closing a door before anything else could come through it. "Night," Jasper said. He sat on the porch for another hour after Eli went inside, watching the stars come out fully, and thought about windows and rooms and the particular bravery it takes to be honest about what you've dropped along the way. Something changed after that evening on the porch, not suddenly, not in any way either of them acknowledged. But Jasper could feel it the way you feel a change in atmospheric pressure, not seen, not heard, just present, a shift in the invisible physics of the space between two people. Eli worked differently now. The difference was subtle but real, the way the difference between a man doing a task and a man learning a task is subtle but entirely distinct if you know what you're looking for. He started asking questions, not defensive questions, not the kind designed to poke holes in instructions, but genuine ones. Why do we rotate the paddocks this way? How do you know when a horse is in actual pain versus just grumpy? What's the difference between that fence post technique and the one you showed me last week? Jasper answered every question with the same patient seriousness he brought to everything else. And somewhere in those exchanges, in the daily, practical, dirt under the fingernails vocabulary of ranch work, they began to actually know each other. Eli was funny, not in the performed, look at me way Jasper had initially suspected from someone who'd used charm as a survival strategy, but in the dry, deadpan way of someone who noticed things and couldn't resist saying them. When the ancient ranch truck, a 1987 Ford that wheezed and complained on every incline, stalled on the way up the South Ridge, Eli looked at it for a long moment and said very seriously, "I think it's grieving," and Jasper had to turn away to hide that he was genuinely laughing. He was also, Jasper discovered, extremely competitive about things he pretended not to care about. When they started doing repair work on the south fence line, and Jasper casually timed his own post-driving to see how long it took, Eli clocked it and spent the next 3 days incrementally improving his own time without ever once mentioning that he was doing so. Jasper watched this happen with quiet amusement and did not comment on it. And he was kind, in ways he clearly hadn't learned to be comfortable with yet, like a talent that embarrassed him. When one of the barn cats showed up with an injured paw, Eli was the one who spent 40 minutes sitting still in the corner of the tack room until the cat trusted him enough to approach, then carefully cleaned and wrapped the paw with a gentleness that was completely at odds with the persona he'd arrived with. He left food and water in the corner and pretended, when Jasper mentioned it later, that he didn't know what Jasper was talking about. These were things Jasper noticed. He filed them away carefully in a part of himself where he kept things that mattered and couldn't yet be acted on. Because there was something else happening too, something he was less comfortable thinking about directly. He was aware of Eli in a way that had moved past the professional. The way you become aware of something that generates its own gravity, you don't choose to notice it, it just becomes a condition of the space you're sharing. He was aware of where Eli was in any given room, aware of the register of his voice before he could make out the words. Aware of the way he moved, the particular economy of his gestures when he wasn't performing anything, when it was just the two of them and the horses and the early morning, and how that movement was completely different from the guarded, coiled quality of the person who'd stepped out of that sedan 3.5 weeks ago. He did not examine this awareness too closely. He had work to do. He had a responsibility to Eli that was professional and clear, and he wasn't going to compromise it with something as disruptive as feeling. But he was aware of it, the way you're aware of a fire in the next room. You can choose not to go in there, you can keep yourself busy. You can occupy yourself very thoroughly with other things. But the warmth comes through the wall regardless. The incident with the thunderstorm happened at the end of the 4th week. It came in fast, the way Great Plains summer storms do, no warning, no gradual buildup, just a wall of darkness rolling in from the northwest in the late afternoon and then the sky cracking open. They were out at the south field, a full mile from the barn, finishing the last section of fence line when the first lightning hit the ridge. "Leave it," Jasper said immediately, reading the sky. "Let's go." They ran, not elegantly, not the way it looks in movies with good lighting and slow motion. The practical, unglamorous, mud-gathering sprint of two men hauling tools and racing weather, and the weather winning easily. By the time they reached the barn, the rain was coming in nearly horizontal, warm and hard, and both of them were completely drenched. They tumbled in through the side door, gasping, and stood in the dry, dim interior while the storm hammered the roof above them like something furious. The horses shifted and snorted in their stalls. Ghost made a low, anxious sound. Eli went to him immediately, which Jasper noticed. He stood against Ghost's stall door, one arm over the rail, talking to the horse in a low voice. Ghost pressed his forehead to Eli's chest, and Eli held the horse's face in both hands the way you hold something you don't want to lose. Outside, lightning cracked again and the thunder came 4 seconds behind it, close enough to feel, and Ghost shuddered, but Eli held on, murmuring something Jasper couldn't hear over the rain. Jasper watched this for a moment, then he turned away to check the other horses. When he came back, Eli was sitting on a hay bale outside Ghost's stall, arms resting on his knees, hair plastered flat and dripping steadily onto the hay. He looked up when Jasper approached, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The rain on the roof was enormous and constant, filling all the space in the world. Then Eli said, "I lied, by the way." Jasper sat down on the hay bale next to him, not directly beside him but angled close enough that the warmth between them was present. He waited. That night on the porch, Eli said, when I said I wasn't scared of anything. He looked at his hands. I'm scared of most things, actually. I'm scared of trying things properly and failing. I'm scared of my dad looking at me like that again. I'm scared of the version of myself that's making decisions I can't take back. A pause. I'm scared I left the person I actually was somewhere back down a road I can't find anymore. The rain kept going. Ghost shifted in his stall. Jasper said, I don't think you left him. I think he's just been waiting. Eli looked at him sideways. The dim light of the barn, the rain outside, the closeness of the hay bale, all of it conspired to reduce the world to something very small and very immediate. The distance between them was maybe 18 inches. Waiting for what? Eli asked. His voice was quieter than usual. Jasper held his gaze, and for one moment, one long, suspended, electrically aware moment, neither of them moved. The air had a quality to it like the pause before a sound, like the space between lightning and thunder. Then Jasper looked away, back at the horses, back at the neutral middle distance that was safe and reasonable. For permission, he said, to come back. Eli was quiet for a long time after that. When the storm finally eased and the rain became something manageable, he stood up, stretched, and walked toward the barn door without looking back. But just before he stepped out into the drizzle, he paused with one hand on the door frame. Jasper, he said, not turning around. Yeah. Thank you for a short pause, for not being what I expected. He walked out into the gray evening rain. Jasper sat alone on the hay bale for several minutes in the smell of horses and wet straw and thought very carefully about things he was not going to do. His name was Dalton, and he arrived on a Friday. He was a friend of Eli's, apparently from Austin. Early 20s, easy-looking, with a wide, bright smile and the particular confidence of someone who had never spent a day wondering whether or not people liked him. He drove up in a truck that cost more than Jasper made in 2 years and stepped out with his arms wide and said, "Morrow." And Eli, who had been cross-legged on the paddock fence watching Ghost, practically fell off the rail scrambling down. They did the backslapping, shoulder-grabbing reunion thing. Eli was laughing, loudly, fully, the kind of laugh Jasper had only seen glimpses of before, and something in the ease and familiarity of it hit Jasper somewhere quiet. He turned back to the feed shed. He had work to do. Dalton was not technically doing anything wrong. He was friendly. He helped carry things when asked. He complimented the ranch in ways that were genuine and not performative. That evening he sat on the back porch with a bottle of beer and told a story about something that had happened at a party in Austin that made even Jasper smile reluctantly. But Eli was different with him here. Not worse exactly, just the person Eli had been slowly, carefully becoming over 5 weeks receded slightly like a tide going back. The walls didn't go all the way up again, but they went partway. Eli was louder, more performative, quicker with the self-deprecating jokes that kept everything on the surface. He moved through the ranch the next morning with a looseness that looked like confidence but was actually something more like deflection, the easy motion of someone who doesn't have to be anywhere in particular. He was late to the morning rounds for the first time in 2 weeks, by 15 minutes. Jasper said nothing. At lunch, Dalton mentioned casually that there was a thing happening in town that evening, a bar on the main street, apparently some kind of live music situation, and wouldn't it be great if... We can't, Jasper said. He hadn't meant to say we. Work starts at 5:30. Eli looked at him across the table. Something passed through his expression that was complicated and quick, surprise, maybe, and something after the surprise that was harder to name. It's one night, Dalton said with his easy smile. Ranch doesn't take nights off, Jasper said simply. He stood, picked up his plate, and went inside. He heard Dalton say something quietly and Eli respond, also quietly, but couldn't make out the words. He washed his plate at the sink and looked out the window at the yard and told himself very firmly that what he had just done was about professional responsibility and operational consistency, and nothing whatsoever else. He was not entirely convincing. Dalton left on Sunday afternoon, and Sunday afternoon was when everything got complicated. Eli found Jasper in the equipment shed doing maintenance on the ATV and stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything. Jasper registered his presence without looking up from the engine. You didn't like him, Eli said. I didn't have an opinion about him, Jasper said, which was a very careful sentence. Yes, you did. Eli came inside, leaned against the workbench. You got quieter. You do this thing when you're, I don't know, closed off. You go flat like you're reading from a script instead of. He stopped, seemed to reconsider. Jasper looked up from the engine. Eli was watching him with that particular focused attention he brought to things he actually cared about, the same look he gave fence math and ghost and the sky before weather. Instead of what? Jasper asked. Instead of just being how you actually are, Eli said it simply without accusation. A silence. The afternoon light came through the shed door in a warm bar, catching the dust in the air. Somewhere outside, a horse blew through its nose. I was managing my responsibilities, Jasper said. You were annoyed, Eli said. He said it without satisfaction, without teasing, just as a fact offered plainly. And you managed it, yes, but you were annoyed. He paused. Why? Jasper set down the wrench, straightened up. He was aware of how small the shed was, of the quality of the afternoon light, of the 18 inches between where he was standing and where Eli was leaning. Because you changed, he said, and immediately felt that was too much. Eli went very still. When he was here, Jasper continued, keeping his voice professionally level, you were different, not bad, just, he stopped, tried again. You've been doing good work, real work, and I watched that go somewhere when your friend arrived. Eli was looking at him with an expression that was very hard to read. Is that a professional concern? He asked. His voice was neutral, but the question wasn't. Yes, Jasper said. Is it only a professional concern? The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, which in the context of a dusty equipment shed on a Sunday afternoon felt like a geological era. Jasper said. I'm just asking, Eli said quietly. He wasn't leaning against the workbench anymore. He'd straightened up and he was looking at Jasper with that open, undefended expression, the one that appeared when he forgot to protect himself or decided not to bother. Jasper looked at him steadily. At the dark hair and the jaw and the eyes that had been hostile and bored and afraid and open and warm and a dozen other things in the past 5 weeks, a whole running record of a person coming back to themselves. You should get some rest, Jasper said. Tomorrow's a full day. Eli held his gaze for one more second, one carefully weighted, deliberate second. Then he nodded once and walked out of the shed into the Sunday afternoon. Jasper pressed both hands flat against the workbench and stood there with his head bowed, listening to the sound of footsteps on gravel getting fainter and the horses in the paddock and his own heartbeat, which was doing something complicated. The week that followed was the hardest of all. Not because anything dramatic happened, precisely because nothing dramatic happened. Because they both woke up at 5 and worked through the morning and ate lunch, and worked through the afternoon and sat on the back porch in the evenings, and all of that was exactly the same as every other week, except that everything was now threaded through with the awareness of that Sunday afternoon in the shed, the questions Eli had asked and the non-answers Jasper had given, and neither of them mentioned it, and the not mentioning accumulated like pressure behind a wall. Eli was quieter, not in the hostile, withdrawn way of the first week, but in a more considered way, like someone choosing their words very carefully or choosing not to speak because they weren't sure they could trust what would come out. He still asked questions about the work. He still talked to Ghost in his low, private voice in the evenings. He was still there, entirely present in all the ways that mattered. But some frequency had gone out of the air between them, something that had been broadcasting quietly and was now static. Jasper missed it. He didn't allow himself to think the word miss, but the thing the word describes was present, a low continuous note beneath everything else. On Wednesday he caught himself watching Eli from across the yard, just standing there with a halter in his hands watching Eli set fence posts in the heat of the afternoon, the way the sun caught the back of his neck, the focused efficiency of his movements, the small unconscious way he pushed his hair off his forehead with his forearm when his hands were occupied, and realized he'd been standing there for close to 2 minutes doing nothing useful. He turned around and went back to what he was doing. Thursday night, he sat at the kitchen table after Eli had gone to bed and called his older sister, Clara, who lived in Albuquerque and was the one person in his life he could talk to in something close to complete honesty. Something's happening, he said when she picked up. Okay, she said. Clara had always been good at making room for things to be said. He stopped. There's one of the young men, the ones I take on for the season. A beat, what about him? He's different, Jasper said. He came here as one thing and he's turning into something else in front of me and He stopped again, looked at the ceiling. I don't know what to do with that. Clara was quiet for a moment, then she said very carefully, different how, Jasper? He didn't answer, which was an answer. How old is he? 22, 23, an adult, that's not the... I know that's not the issue, Clara said gently. How long is he there for? He arrived mid-season, probably through October, maybe November. Another quiet, then Clara said, are you sure this is something or are you? I'm sure, he said, and saying it plainly without qualification to another human being made it real in a way it hadn't quite been before. Clara exhaled slowly, okay, and does he? I don't know, the words came out rougher than he intended. I think maybe, but I'm responsible for him, his father is paying me to. Jasper, Clara said, he's not 16, he's not your employee in a conventional sense, you're not his teacher or his boss in a legally complicated way, he's an adult man who is temporarily in your care in a very informal arrangement. She paused. I'm not saying act on anything, I'm saying don't treat yourself like you're committing a crime by having feelings. He was quiet. You're allowed to feel things, she said more softly. You've always done this, put walls up around the things that matter to you, like if you don't name them, they can't hurt you. They can't hurt what they can't reach, he said. They always reach, she said simply, that's what feelings do. He thanked her and hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for another hour in the quiet house and listened to the ranch settle around him the way old buildings do at night. It happened on a Saturday in the hour before dawn, when the world is its most honest. Jasper was up early, he was often up before his alarm, that particular kind of early that comes from a mind that won't stay settled. He was on the porch with coffee when he saw the barn light on and registered with the automatic inventory keeping of someone responsible for animals that it shouldn't be. He went across the yard in the dark. The barn door was open, just slightly warm amber light spilling from the crack. Inside he found Eli sitting in the aisle between the stalls, cross-legged on the concrete, his back against Ghost's stall door, his head tipped back. Ghost's nose rested on the top of Eli's head, the horse doing that particular thing horses sometimes do, a slow, steady contact that looks almost like comfort, if you believe animals are capable of that, which Jasper did. Eli's eyes were open. He didn't startle when Jasper came in. He looked over slowly and without surprise, like he'd been expecting him, or like the hour was too early and too honest for pretending. Jasper sat down on the concrete on the other side of the aisle opposite him, his coffee, the barn, the warm horse breath in the cool air. Can't sleep, Jasper asked. Not really, Eli looked back up at the ceiling, was thinking. About what? What I'm going to do in October, he said it without drama, just a fact that had weight, when the season ends, when I go back. Jasper felt that land somewhere, he held still. And he said. And I don't know, Eli lowered his head, looked at his hands. I came here as one person and I feel like I don't know how to explain this. Try, Jasper said. Eli looked at him directly. In the amber barn light, the planes of his face were clean and unguarded. Ghost's nose was still on his head, absurdly gentle. I feel like I've been shedding something, Eli said slowly. The whole time I've been here, like every week something else has come off, and I don't know if what's underneath is better or worse, I just know it's more real, it's more mine, he paused. And I'm terrified of going back somewhere where everyone expects the old version and I just slip back into it because it's the path of least resistance. You don't have to go back to that version, Jasper said. It's easy to say that here, Eli said. Here there's nothing to go back to, here there's just, he stopped. His eyes were on Jasper's face, very direct. Here there's just you. The words were simple. They were also, in the quiet honesty of a barn at 4 in the morning, the most complex and loaded things anyone had said in that space in a long time. Jasper felt the fire in the next room. He felt the wall between them and how thin it was and how much heat was coming through it. Eli, he said carefully. Don't, Eli said not unkindly, don't manage this one, don't give me the professional version. He held eye contact, steady and quiet. I know what I'm saying, I know what I feel, I'm not asking you to do anything, I'm not asking for anything, he exhaled. I needed to say something real without the wall up just once. Jasper looked at him across the aisle. At this person who had arrived like a storm and was now sitting cross-legged on barn concrete at 4 in the morning with a horse's nose on his head, saying the truest thing he could find. The wall in Jasper's chest, the one he'd been standing behind very carefully for 6 weeks, did something it hadn't done in years. It didn't fall, nothing so dramatic, but it developed a door. "I feel it too," Jasper said quietly, simply, without further construction. Eli went still, his eyes didn't waver. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah." A very long silence, ghost-breathed, the barn was warm and still. "But," Eli said, not a question, not quite, just an acknowledgement that there were conditions. "But," Jasper agreed, he kept his voice level and honest. "You're here in a specific capacity. Your father is trusting me with something that matters to him, and I think," he paused, picking his words with the same care he brought to everything important. "I think you're still in the middle of something, still shedding. I don't want to be a thing that interrupts that. I don't want to be something that happens to you in the middle of becoming someone." Eli was very still, thinking. The frown line appeared between his brows. "That's the most respectful thing anyone's ever said to me," he said finally, "and I kind of hate it." Jasper felt something move through him, something warm and helpless and close to laughing. "I know," he said. "But I understand it," Eli said slowly. He looked down at his hands again. "I do, I actually," he stopped, started again. "I came here as someone who would have just pushed, would have made it happen just because I wanted it to, regardless of anything else. And the fact that he shook his head. "The fact that you're thinking about what's right instead of just what you want." He looked up again, and something in his eyes was warm and complicated and direct. "That's exactly the problem. That's exactly why." Jasper held his gaze and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say to that. "So what do we do?" Eli asked. "We finish the season," Jasper said. "You keep becoming who you're becoming, we're honest with each other, and when October comes," he let the sentence stay open. "When October comes," Eli repeated. "We see what's true then." Eli nodded slowly. He leaned his head back against Ghost's stall door again, and the horse pressed gently forward, and Eli closed his eyes. They sat together in the warm barn for another hour, two men on opposite sides of an aisle, not touching, not speaking much, in the particular peace of having said the real thing and survived it. Something irreversible happens when two people have told each other the truth. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that rewrites everything that comes before it. Just in the quiet, molecular way of a change in composition, like the same elements reorganized. Everything looks the same from the outside, and everything is fundamentally different from the inside. The weeks that followed were both easier and harder than anything before them. Easier because the pretending was done. There was no longer the work of maintaining the distance of professional neutrality when both of them knew the ground that lay beneath it. They talked more openly. They were gentler with each other without trying to be small kindnesses that happen naturally, the way water finds the path of least resistance. Jasper leaving Eli's coffee on the porch rail on cold mornings without being asked. Eli appearing with the parts Jasper needed for a repair job before Jasper had mentioned needing them. The way they moved around each other in shared spaces with an awareness and consideration that was its own language. Harder because proximity is its own kind of test. Because knowing something is real and choosing not to act on it requires a discipline that has nothing to do with fence posts or early mornings. Because there were moments in the good, ordinary, unglamorous days of ranch work that were more genuinely close than anything Jasper had managed in years, and the impulse to let something more happen than was right to let happen was not a small thing to hold back. He managed it, he'd always been good at staying on the right side of lines he'd drawn. But he was aware with increasing specificity of the texture of time, of how each day was one day fewer, of October coming with the same indifference the seasons always have. Eli was extraordinary with Ghost now. That was not hyperbole. In 6 weeks the horse had gone from tolerating his presence with cautious suspicion to actively seeking him out, pressing against the paddock rail when Eli came into view, doing the soft, throaty vocalization that horses make for specific people they trust. Jasper watched this relationship develop with the complex feeling of someone watching two people who were right for each other find their way toward each other. He let Eli start riding at the 7-week mark. Light work, paddock only, basic groundwork first. Eli turned out to have a natural seat, the ease of someone who'd never been badly taught because he'd never been taught at all, and Ghost, extraordinarily, seemed to understand that this was different from other riders. The first time they went a full circuit of the paddock together, Eli at a rising trot and Ghost doing his responsive, light-footed best, Jasper watched from the fence and felt something in his chest that was purely, simply glad. Not complicated, not wanting anything more than the moment. Just glad. Eli pulled up next to the fence, slightly breathless, eyes bright. Well, he said. Better than I expected, Jasper said. Eli pointed at him. That was a compliment from Jasper Holt, someone mark the calendar. I give compliments, Jasper said. You give evaluations, Eli said. This was different, this had warmth in it. Get down before Ghost gets ideas, Jasper said, which was not a denial. Eli swung down and landed lightly and stood next to the horse, one arm around Ghost's neck, grinning at Jasper from a distance of about 2 feet. 2 feet was not a large distance. Jasper felt it in the physics of the moment, the barn smell and the warm afternoon and the 2 feet, which was not enough. He turned and went to get the water buckets. Coward, Eli called after him very pleasantly. Jasper didn't answer. He was possibly correct. The letter from the architecture school arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a feed catalog and a utility bill in the metal box at the end of the ranch drive. Eli brought the mail in, which he'd started doing without being asked, somewhere around week 5, and stopped in the kitchen doorway with the envelope in his hand. His name on it. Return address, University of Texas School of Architecture. Jasper was at the table with his own paperwork. He looked up. Eli held up the envelope. His face was doing several things at once. When did you, Jasper started. Couple weeks ago, Eli said. He was looking at the envelope the way you look at something that might be dangerous. I wrote to the admissions office, asked about late enrollment mature student applications. They said to send some samples of my old work. He turned the envelope over in his hands, which I did. I dug out everything from when I was 19-20 before everything went sideways. That's why you had your sketchbook sent out, Jasper said, putting it together. 3 weeks earlier, a package had arrived from Austin that Eli had taken directly to his room without mentioning. Yeah. They looked at each other. Open it, Jasper said. What if it's a no? Then it's a no and it's not the end of anything and you know what you want and that's still something. He kept his voice even and matter of fact, the way you do when someone needs not to be consoled but to be steadied. Eli looked at the envelope again. Then he sat down across from Jasper at the kitchen table and opened it. Jasper watched his face as he read. He watched the small controlled sequence of expressions, caution, concentration, disbelief, the careful controlled arrival of something that might be joy. Eli set the letter down on the table. He looked at it for a moment without speaking, then he looked up at Jasper. Conditional acceptance, he said. His voice was doing something it hadn't done before, a slight, barely there unsteadiness that was completely different from fear. Late enrollment, spring semester, I have to submit a full portfolio and a statement of intent and there's a phone interview, but they're interested. Of course they are, Jasper said. Of course they, Eli made a sound. You don't know what my work was like. I've watched you for 8 weeks, Jasper said. I know what your work is like. He nodded toward the letter. That's the right call on their part. Eli looked at him across the table. He was breathing a little unevenly. His eyes were bright in the kitchen afternoon light. Jasper, he said. What? You know that thing where you feel like something is, he stopped, started over. You know when something happens and you realize that the version of you that exists right now in this specific moment is someone you actually like, and you can't be sure you would have gotten here without, he stopped again. Eli, Jasper said gently. You changed something, Eli said simply. Whatever this place did to me, you're most of that. The kitchen was quiet. The afternoon light came through the window above the sink. On the table between them, a letter, a stack of ranch paperwork, 2 coffee mugs. Jasper held his gaze and said, You changed yourself, I just held the space. Eli shook his head slowly. Don't do that, don't give it back to me, take the thing I'm giving you. A beat, then quietly, All right, you're welcome. There, Eli said, something settled in his face, something satisfied and warm. Was that so hard? Insufferable, Jasper said, which meant the opposite. The light changed first. That was always how the ending of summer announced itself on the ranch, not in temperature, not yet, but in the quality of light. It went from the clear, direct, overhead gold of July and August to something that came in longer and lower and warmer in color, the light of a world tilting on its axis. Eli noticed it on a Tuesday morning in late September. Jasper found him standing in the middle of the east paddock before work, turned toward the sunrise with his eyes closed and his face tipped back, not in a performative way, just in the way you do something you're trying to memorize. He left him to it. They had 3 weeks left, they both knew it. It was present in everything, not heavily, not like grief, but like the particular awareness you bring to something you know is finite. You pay different attention to a song when you know it's almost over. Eli's portfolio was done. He'd spent evenings in the bunkhouse at the small desk, drawing with a focused, quiet intensity that was a world away from the person who'd arrived expecting a working holiday. The statement of intent had taken him 4 drafts and several conversations with Jasper about what he actually believed about architecture, about space, about the way built environments either welcome or diminish the people inside them. Buildings are basically communication, Eli had said one evening, walking Jasper through a sketch with an animated quality to his hands that Jasper hadn't seen before, the quality that appears when people talk about things they actually care about, when the ordinary volume of a person's life turns up several notches. They say things to the people inside them and around them. They say you matter or you're temporary or this was built for someone richer than you, and most people don't consciously read that language but they feel it constantly. You're going to be good at this, Jasper said. I'm going to be terrifying at this, Eli said. And grinned, and it was the fullest, freest grin Jasper had ever seen on his face. He took a photograph of it, in his mind, the kind you file away in the place where you keep things you want to keep. The second to last week, they rode together for the first time. Jasper on Copper, the big chestnut, patient and solid as a table, and Eli on Ghost, who had been outfitted with the lightest tack in the barn and who moved, under Eli's hands, with a floating quality that made several weeks of Jasper's careful work look like it had been worth it. They went out the south trail, through the cottonwoods and along the ridge that looked out over the flat, enormous reach of the valley below, the ranch a toy-sized arrangement of buildings in the middle of all that land and sky. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. The horses moved easily together, finding a natural rhythm alongside each other the way they do with riders who are at peace, and the late September light came in gold and long and the land stretched out around them in every direction. At the top of the ridge they stopped, side by side, the valley below, the sky above, the horses standing still except for the small movements of breathing, tails flicking at nothing. I keep trying to draw this in my head, Eli said, the light on that ridge line, that specific angle. You should draw it for real. I need to, before he stopped, looked sideways at Jasper, before I leave. The word sat between them, leave, the whole accumulation of weeks behind it compressed into one syllable. Yeah, Jasper said. A long quiet, then Eli said, is it okay that I don't want to? Jasper looked at him. The slanted light made his face look painted, the particular beauty of good light on good bones, and behind that, the particular beauty of a person who had grown, visibly and genuinely, into something more fully themselves. Yeah, Jasper said quietly, it's more than okay. Is it okay that I'm… Eli stopped, restarted. I've been thinking about what you said back in the barn about October and seeing what's true then. Jasper waited. I know what's true, Eli said, not aggressively, not urgently, just clearly the way you state a thing you've had time to be certain of. I've known for a while, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't, he looked for the word, circumstantial, make sure it wasn't just that you were here and you were the person who was kind to me and I attached to that, because I do that. He said it without self-pity, just as information. I attach to kindness because I don't get it from the right places. I know that about myself. And Jasper asked. And it's not that, he held Jasper's gaze. I know the difference now, I've had time to find out. He looked back out at the valley. I know what I want, I'm just trying to be honest about whether the timing is… Come back, Jasper said. Eli looked at him sharply. In the spring, Jasper said, he was looking straight ahead at the valley and his voice was quiet and steady and extremely certain. When the semester starts, when your life is starting to look like what it's supposed to look like, come back, visit, or, he stopped, thought, or don't come back here specifically, but find me and see if it's still true. Eli was very still, and if it is. Jasper looked at him then, and the thing in his eyes was not guarded and it was not managed and it was not the professional, steady, contained expression he wore for most things. It was honest, undefended. The thing behind the wall brought out into the light for exactly one person to see. Then it's still true, Jasper said simply, and we go from there. Eli looked at him for a long, long moment. The horses breathed. The light came in gold and the valley stretched below and the sky was enormous above them. "Okay," Eli said and smiled, not the performed, easy social smile, the small, real one, the one that surprised him. "Okay." October arrived in a single afternoon, the way seasons sometimes do, one day still warm and then something cool and definitive in the air the next morning, a clarity that hadn't been there before. Eli's last day fell on a Friday. His father was coming on Saturday. They did the full rounds together, every task, the complete morning sequence that had been their rhythm for 3 months. Neither of them rushed. Neither of them dragged. They worked through it the way you carry out a ritual that you know matters but that you don't need to explain. At noon, Eli went to Ghost's paddock and stood with the horse for a long time. Jasper watched from across the yard without approaching. This was private, he understood that. He saw, from that distance, the moment Eli pressed his forehead against Ghost's. The two of them standing completely still together in the October noon light, the pale horse and the young man who had arrived in expensive sneakers not knowing what anything was. He turned away. At 4 that afternoon, Eli found him in the equipment shed, of course. Of course it was the equipment shed, and stood in the doorway. "I wanted to say something properly," Eli said. Jasper turned around. Eli came inside. He stopped about 2 feet away, the same 2 feet that had measured the distance between them for months, the respectful, careful, knowing space of two people who understand what proximity means between them. "Thank you," Eli said, "for being exactly what this was, for not making it less than it should have been or more than it should have been yet." He said yet with clear intention, and Jasper received it that way. "For taking me seriously when I was making it very difficult to, for Ghost, for the porch, for the barn." He paused, "for the coffee on the fence rail." Jasper looked at him. Then he did something he hadn't done yet, that he'd been careful not to do, that was now, in the equipment shed at 4 o'clock on the last day, simply the right thing. He stepped forward and put his arms around Eli. It was a hug, simple, no more than that, firm and warm and real, the kind that involves the full weight of one person against another, the kind that communicates everything that hasn't been said and doesn't need to be. Eli went still for exactly 1 heartbeat, the kind of stillness that means "I didn't expect this," and then he hugged back, and his arms came around Jasper's shoulders, and for a long moment they just stood there in the equipment shed with the afternoon light coming through the door and the smell of grease and hay and the ranch around them. When they stepped back, Eli's eyes were doing that thing they did sometimes, bright and controlled, fighting something. "Spring," Jasper said quietly. "Spring," Eli confirmed. He walked out of the shed and across the yard and into the bunkhouse to finish packing, and Jasper stood in the middle of the equipment shed and breathed slowly in the silence. The ranch was quieter after he left. Jasper had expected that. In the practical sense, 1 fewer person meant 1 fewer set of footsteps, 1 fewer voice asking questions at noon, 1 fewer figure on the paddock rail at dusk. He'd anticipated the absence as a logistical fact. What he hadn't anticipated was the specific texture of it, the particular shape of the quiet that Eli left behind. Ghost spent 3 days standing at the paddock gate looking toward the main road. Not dramatically, horses don't do drama, they do fact, just positioned that direction with a patience that looked like waiting. On the 4th day, Jasper spent an extra half hour with him in the evening, not doing anything specific, just being nearby. Ghost accepted this with the particular grace of animals who understand that sometimes what's being offered is not a solution but a presence. "I know," Jasper said once quietly to the horse. Ghost's ear moved toward him. "Me too." The weeks that followed had their own rhythm. Work the ranch, the turning of the season into its quieter register. The roof on the main barn got repaired finally, and the east paddock got the fencing it needed, which Eli had helped lay the groundwork for and which Jasper finished with the particular satisfaction of completed things. The days got shorter, the mornings got colder, the quality of light kept changing, deepening, the world doing its annual accounting. He thought about Eli often and was honest with himself about it. He didn't package it differently or qualify it. He thought about the porch and the barn and the ridge and the equipment shed, the whole accumulated specific geography of a season with another person in it, and he held it carefully, the way you hold things that matter while you're waiting to know what they mean. 3 weeks after Eli left, a letter arrived. Handwritten on paper with small hand-drawn margins, the kind of margins an architecture student puts on things without thinking about it. The letter said, Jasper, I keep trying to write this in a way that isn't embarrassing and failing, so I'll just write it plainly. I submitted the full portfolio Monday. The phone interview is next week. My dad and I had the actual conversation, not the one where we talk around things but the real one, and it was hard and it was necessary, and something on the other side of it feels different. I've been drawing every day. I drew the ridge. I wanted to tell you it looks exactly right on paper. I wanted to tell you Ghost was right about you. I wanted to tell you I'm coming back in spring. E. Jasper read it twice, then he went to his desk and wrote back. His handwriting was large and slightly awkward on paper, more comfortable with tools than letters, but he wrote carefully. The letter said, Eli, the ranch is quieter. Ghost is waiting. The roof is done. You should have seen the state it was in. It'll save us the next 3 rainstorms easy. I spoke to the admissions counselor at the large animal program in Lubbock. Spring intake, I'm applying. I thought you should know that you were part of that decision, which might be embarrassing to say, but you asked me to take things you gave me instead of giving them back, so I'll be here when spring comes. He came back on the second Saturday of March. Jasper knew the approximate date. He didn't know the specific day until his phone buzzed that morning with a text that said, turning onto your road, fair warning, E. He was at the fence checking the new posts when the truck came up the drive. A different truck this time, older, practical, the kind of truck a person chooses rather than inherits from a life that was built for someone else. Eli stepped out. He looked the same and entirely different, the way people do when the essential thing about them has become more concentrated. He was wearing work clothes, actual ones, not expensive ones, and his hair was slightly shorter, and he was carrying a bag over one shoulder and looking at the ranch with an expression Jasper had never seen on his face before. Ease, pure uncomplicated ease, like arriving somewhere that fit. Ghost in the near paddock raised his head, made the sound. Eli's face broke into something full and clean and unguarded, and he went directly to the paddock without looking at Jasper first, which was entirely correct, which was the right thing in exactly the right order. Jasper watched from the fence as Eli leaned over the rail and Ghost pressed into him immediately, without the cautious reassessment horses do with returning people. Just directly in, forehead to chest, like no time had passed, like the language between them had stayed perfectly intact through all the months of winter. After a minute, Eli looked up and over at Jasper. The morning was cool and clear. The light came in low from the east, that particular March light that is full of the particular promise of things beginning. The cottonwoods were just starting to show their first green. Jasper walked across the yard. He stopped in front of Eli and they stood looking at each other in the morning light. The full winter between them, everything they'd said and not said and held carefully and waited on. You applied, Eli said. I got in, Jasper said, start in September. Eli's face did something complicated and warm. Yeah. Yeah, a pause, you. Full admission, start Monday. He said it with a quietly odd quality, like he was still adjusting to it being real. Of course, Jasper said. Eli looked at him for a long moment, then he said very simply, is it still true? It was the question from the ridge, from October. The one they'd left open on purpose with the specific care of people who understood that some things needed time and space and real life around them before they could be known for certain. Jasper looked at Eli, at the clear, honest face of someone who had arrived as one thing and become something else, someone real and particular and specific, someone who had looked at Ghost and understood something, who had sat in barn doorways in thunderstorms and written letters on paper with architectural margins, and driven back in a practical truck on a March morning looking like he was arriving home. It's still true, Jasper said. And Eli closed the distance. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't filmed. It was just 2 men standing in a ranch yard in early March morning light and one of them stepping forward the last foot and a half and the world very quietly rearranging itself around that fact. Jasper's hand came to the side of Eli's face. Eli's eyes closed, and the moment was exactly what it was, simple and earned and real, the way the best things are. Ghost made a soft sound from the paddock, neither of them looked. Epilogue: what the horses know. Later that afternoon, sitting on the back porch with coffee in the October mugs which had become the March mugs now and would eventually become whatever mugs they chose for whatever came next, Eli said. Can I tell you something I didn't tell you then? You can tell me things now, Jasper said. Eli looked out at the paddock, where Ghost was doing his evening circuit of the fence line with the unhurried authority of someone who had been patient and been right about it. When I arrived, he said, when my dad drove away and I was standing in your yard with my sneakers on the gravel, he paused. I had already decided this was going to be 2 months of misery that I had to get through. I had it all planned out, keep my head down, don't fight back but don't give anything either, just wait it out. I know, Jasper said. You know. I could see it on you from 40 feet away. He looked sideways at him. You had the face of someone counting days. Eli laughed, soft and genuine. Yeah, and then, he stopped. And then you handed me coffee and you looked at me and you weren't what I was ready for, and I didn't know what to do with that. You were prickly about it, Jasper said mildly. I was terrified about it, Eli said, which came out as prickly, yes. Jasper looked at him, this person who could say I was terrified plainly out loud in the afternoon without it costing him the way it used to. You did well, he said. You did a lot better than most. Most people who come through here. Most people anywhere. The porch, the coffee, the afternoon going golden. Ghost finished his circuit and stood at the gate looking toward the house. Jasper, Eli said. What? I'm glad you were worth the wait. Jasper considered this, looked at the horse, looked at the man, looked at the shape of the future which had the particular quality of something large and open and full of possibility, the way land looks from a ridge when you've climbed there with someone you trust. So are you, he said. The sun kept going west, Ghost stood at the gate, the first stars appeared one at a time in no hurry. Read the end, or is it? That moment in the equipment shed when Jasper finally said, come back, do you think he had made up his mind earlier than he admitted? And when Eli drove back in that practical truck on a March morning, what was the first thing he actually said when they were finally, truly, alone?
If this story moved you, surprised you, made your heart do something, you already know what to do. Hit like so more people find this story. Subscribe for more interesting and heart touching stories. Comment below Team Jasper knew first or Team Eli knew first. Every comment, every like, every subscription tells me this story mattered to you, and that matters to me. Thanks for watching and keep watching.